The night was quiet, wrapped in a velvet blanket of stars, and the streets of the old town lay deserted except for the faint hum of the wind brushing against the rusted street lamps. In one of those narrow streets stood a house whose windows glowed faintly with the dim light of a lantern. Inside, on a wooden chair by the window, sat Rehan, a man whose eyes carried a weight heavier than words could ever hold. His face was lean, shadowed by years of unspoken grief, and his fingers tapped absent-mindedly on the window pane, as though searching for a rhythm that once belonged to his life but was now long lost. Rehan had once known laughter, the kind that burst freely like sunlight through morning clouds, but those days felt like fragments of a dream. His life had once been filled with the fragrance of love, a fragrance that lingered even after the person who carried it had walked away. He thought about her every night, as if his soul were bound to hers by invisible threads that time had failed to sever. Her name was Alia. He remembered the first time he saw her, years ago, when life still carried color in every corner. She had been standing beneath the old neem tree that grew at the edge of their street, her hands full of books, her hair catching the sunlight as though each strand was woven with gold. She smiled at him that day, just a fleeting smile, nothing more, and yet, for Rehan, it was as if the universe had whispered a secret meant only for him. That smile became a memory etched so deeply in his heart that even years later, he could close his eyes and see it as vividly as if it were happening again. Their story had not been sudden, nor born of dramatic encounters, but rather it unfolded slowly, tenderly, in the quiet spaces of their lives. They would meet by chance at the market, their hands brushing as they reached for the same basket of fruit. They would pass each other in the lanes, offering shy greetings that carried more weight than entire conversations. And eventually, they began to meet intentionally, under that neem tree, where they would sit for hours, sharing stories of their dreams, their fears, their secret hopes. "I know you will make something of yourself one day, Rehan," she had once said, her eyes glimmering with belief that he struggled to have in himself. "You carry more strength than you realize." And he, smiling softly, had replied, "And if I don't? What if I fail? Then I'll still be here," she whispered, her voice a promise, her presence a shelter. Rehan believed her. How could he not? Love makes believers of us all, no matter how skeptical our souls may be. But life, cruel in its timing, demanded sacrifices. When Rehan finished school, he was forced to leave his town to find work in the city. His family had nothing, the debts were suffocating, and the weight of survival pressed heavily on his shoulders. The day he left, Alia had stood by the gate, her dupatta fluttering in the wind, her eyes wet but defiant, as if refusing to let grief claim her. "Write to me," she said, holding his hand tightly, "and come back for me." "I promise," he replied, though his voice broke on the word. He left with the echo of her voice in his ears, carrying her with him like a prayer, like a lifeline. The city was vast, unforgiving. Rehan worked tirelessly, days melting into nights, his body weary but his mind alive only with thoughts of Alia. Every corner of his small rented room seemed filled with her presence. He began to write letters to her, pouring out his heart onto paper, every dream, every struggle, every longing, but he never sent them. He kept them in a box under his bed, as if fearing that his words might not be enough, as if his love might fall short when laid bare on paper. Months turned into years. He saved money, built a modest life, and all the while, he nurtured the hope of returning to her, of claiming the love that had been waiting faithfully beneath the neem tree. But fate does not always bend to the will of hearts. One evening, as the sun dipped low against the horizon, he received a letter, not from Alia, but from a friend back home. The words on that page tore through him like glass. "Alia is married now." The paper slipped from his trembling hands, and the room seemed to collapse around him. He could not breathe, could not think. Every promise, every dream, every letter unsent suddenly felt like ashes. He had been too late. For days, he wandered the city in silence, numb, his soul hollowed by loss. He tried to imagine her in another's arms, her laughter belonging to someone else, and it broke him in ways words could never capture. He wanted to rage, to scream, to curse fate for its cruelty, but all that came was silence, thick, suffocating silence. Years passed, and Rehan returned to his hometown, but not to claim what was lost. He came back because he had nowhere else to go. The town was smaller now, emptier, and the neem tree still stood, its branches older, heavier, as though it too carried the weight of unfulfilled promises. Rihan avoided it, unable to face the ghost of his own memories. He lived alone, surrounded by the letters he had never sent, each one a reminder of the love that had been his and yet never truly his. His neighbors whispered about him, about his loneliness, but he paid them no mind. His life had shrunk to the size of a single room, his world wrapped in the silence of his heart. And then, one morning, there was a knock at his door. He opened it slowly, expecting perhaps a neighbor or a stranger seeking directions. But there, standing on his doorstep, was a little girl with bright eyes and a bouquet of wildflowers in her small hands. She smiled up at him, a smile so achingly familiar that his breath caught in his throat. "Are you Rihan, uncle?" she asked, her voice sweet, innocent. "Yes," he managed to whisper, though his heart was pounding wildly. "My mama told me about you," she said, holding out the flowers. "She said you were her best friend." Rihan stared at her, his mind spinning, his soul trembling. Who is your mama?" he asked, though deep down, he already knew. "Alia," the girl said, her smile widening. "She's my mama." And in that moment, time collapsed. The years of distance, the weight of heartbreak, the endless nights of loneliness, all of it blurred as he looked into the eyes of Alia's daughter. She carried her mother's light, her warmth, her smile. It was as if Alia had returned, not in body, but in spirit, leaving behind a piece of herself for him to hold on to. Tears filled Rihan's eyes as he knelt down, taking the flowers from the girl's hands with trembling fingers. He wanted to speak, to say 1,000 things, but no words came. All he could do was weep softly, the child's small hand resting comfortingly in his. From that day on, she began to visit him often. She would sit in his room, chattering about school, about friends, about dreams, filling the silence that had once consumed his life. She brought laughter back into his world, a laughter he had thought he would never hear again. And slowly, the wounds that had refused to heal began to close, not because the pain had vanished, but because he now carried a piece of Alia that was alive, breathing, and present. Rihan realized, in the quiet moments between her visits, that life never truly gives us what we imagine. It takes, it breaks, it wounds, but it also gives in ways we do not expect. He had lost Alia, yes, but he had found something she had left behind, something pure, something healing. In the end, Rihan understood that love does not always end in togetherness. Sometimes, love lives on in memories, in unsent letters, in the eyes of a child who smiles just like her mother once did. And though his heart would always carry the silence of what could have been, it also carried the music of what remained. And for the first time in years, Rihan allowed himself to smile, not because the pain was gone, but because love, in its own mysterious way, had never truly left him.